well-being and the well-being of others, because everyone's mental health matters. In the last show, our guest, Dr. Sukhbinder Bilku, a clinical psychologist, provided information about eating disorders, symptoms and support for accessing mental health care as soon as possible. You can listen back to this on Ramadan Radio's Wolves YouTube channel, alongside finding further mental health information on my Twitter feed at Atiyah Ali3. We are not here to offer you advice in place of your clinician. However, we will share information that may encourage you to seek support. If you feel you need to discuss your health and well-being following this show, then please do contact your GP. We won't be taking any live calls today. However, we welcome your comments via the WhatsApp messaging number on 07 440 420 432. We are currently hoping that lockdown during this COVID-19 pandemic will again begin to ease. We may notice that we are beginning to worry about this again, becoming more uncertain, more anxious about the current situation. It is important to find strategies to help us with this. In a previous mental health and emotional well-being show, we focused on COVID-19 and self-care. Please listen back to this for further information on managing your well-being during these changing times. Again, this clip can be found on Ramadan Radio Wolves YouTube channel. In the show today, we have not only a Ramadan special, but also, I think, an early Eid present. I'm pleased to have our guest, Poppy Jaman, taking the time out of her busy schedule to join us on our mental health and emotional well-being radio show. Poppy Jaman OBE is an internationally respected mental health advocate, national policy advisor and social entrepreneur, a global voice of authority on workplace mental health. She is the CEO of the City Mental Health Alliance, a coalition of multinationals working together to create a culture of good mental health and build a global community influencing change and stigma. Poppy is also the director at Rebalance and a trustee for the Centre of Mental Health. Poppy was instrumental in the creation of the NHS's Every Mind Matters platform and was named by the Secretary of State in Parliament as one of England's mental health experts. In 2018, Poppy was awarded an OBE in recognition of her services to people with mental health issues, and also received an honorary doctorate from the University of Gloucestershire. In 2019, she won Woman of the Year at the GG2 Culture and Diversity Leadership Awards, and was named a game changer in the Financial Times Women of 2019 list. Poppy was the founding CEO of the Mental Health First Aid England, and under her leadership, the organisation developed from a small government project into a fast-growing, commercially successful community interest company, recognised by the Financial Times in 2017 as one of the fastest-growing enterprises in Europe. She also served 2 terms on the advisory board of the Public Health England. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Poppy Jaman to Ramadan Radio Wolves Mental Health and Emotional Wellbeing show. Hello and Assalamu alaikum, Poppy. Welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum, Atiyah. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's very long and I feel a little bit embarrassed now. But lovely to meet you, and thank you for inviting me.
Please do. It's very well deserved. And I'm aware that there's actually much more that you do, and that's actually been missed from that introduction. So thank you for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Firstly, in the introduction, we mentioned the GG2 Awards. The GG2 Leadership Awards spotlights remarkable people who use their talents for the greater good. And we look forward to you sharing these with us today. What brought you to contributing in such a way to community and society at large? Could you share where your journey or interest in mental health began?
Yeah, absolutely, Atiyah. And you know, you and I share the same roots. I'm a community development worker, and the thing that that will never leave me, and that's my favorite job title, is I'm a community development worker. That's how I started my career. That's how I will end my career, and it's the power of community development that I really believe in. And I guess the connection to mental health started with my own lived experience of poor mental health. And I, at a very early age, found myself in a marriage that I didn't want to be in. And that for my generation of women was fairly common experience from British Bengali community. You know, we were sort of first, second generation migrant women, and the arranged marriage or the forced marriage system, whichever way you want to look at it, was very active. And it was a matter of sort of I guess just cultural heritage practice that was around, keeping, I guess, our traditions and our and what we see wrapped up as honor, I guess, going. But I found myself in a marriage that I didn't want to be in, and that resulted in my mental health deteriorating at the age of 18. And then I had my first daughter, and who is wonderful. And but actually the birth of my daughter then triggered postnatal depression. But I would say that my mental health struggles probably started in my late teens, being in the middle of sort of that, trying to work out what my British Bengali identity is, and I know that many women and many girls and many boys actually will relate to that. When you're sort of caught between cultures and identities, it's very difficult to find a sense of belonging. And when our belonging is disrupted, our risks of developing mental health struggles increased. And that's exactly what happened to me. And actually, I then found myself accessing counseling through my GP. I found myself with a diagnosis, and the person that was the most helpful at that point in time was my the nurse that supports you when you're when you've just had a baby, and I can't remember the name of that. Is
it the health visitor?
That's it. Yeah. That's it. It's a health visit. It's been a long time. My babies are 24 and 20 now. But yeah, so the health visitor, and she was actually a Chinese woman, and I think the fact that she was from a minority, ethnic minority background herself, she just understood what I was going through, and she helped me identify the fact that I was struggling with my mental health. At the time, I didn't know what mental health was. I just understood the word fagol, which is, in Bengali as in mad, but quite a derogatory word for mental health or mental illness, I suppose. So that was the introduction to mental health. And as I recovered, I found myself I found one of the things that was most helpful was getting a job and becoming financially independent. So yes, I had medication, yes, I had therapy, but those things were still keeping me in a stigmatized and actually self-stigmatized place where I was thinking, well, my life is over, I'm never going to be normal, everybody's going to judge me, all of that. And then I guess my worth ethics kicked in, and I realized that one of the things that I needed to do was come off of benefits. At the time, I think I was receiving something like 60 quid's worth of weekly benefits because of the circumstances I found myself in. And I knew, looking at my daughter, that one of the things that I needed to do was create choice in my life and therefore her life. And one of the ways to do that is to become financially independent. So I got a job at the Citizens Advice Bureau as a community development worker.
Right.
And that was the beginnings of that story. And I guess that job then helped me understand the challenges of minority communities, my own my own heritage, the health inequalities that I was experiencing as a young woman, as a young brown woman. And I guess it activated the activist in me. But my activism has always been around developing communities rather than campaigning. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's really insightful. And I was going to go on to ask you in terms of, who supported you and who made you aware that there was an issue, or how did you realize there was an issue? And you've shared that with regards to the health visitor. You also touched upon stigma. Could you tell us a little bit more about stigma? I know you said this was self-stigmatized, but at the same, you talked about the word Fargo Mad in Bengali and the labels that are given to people who are experiencing mental health problems. Could you tell us a bit more about that? And what?
Yeah, absolutely. So shame and stigma go in hand. When we feel ashamed of anything, whether it's the fact that you're a divorced woman, or whether it's the fact that you've got a physical disability, and then if you've got a mental health issue, you can amplify all of that stigma by 100-fold, I think, because what happens is people look at the message within society is that mental health struggles is a personality weakness, or somehow a genetic weakness, or somehow or something that you will never recover from. And I think that is built into the DNA of many of our cultures, not just South Asian cultures, but I think we have specific issues that are nuanced to our communities that we need to be aware of. But worldwide, otherwise mental health wouldn't be such a big issue in terms of trying to solve it. So the stigma is attached to shame, and that's why I talk about it in the sense of self-stigma. So when I was going through my difficulties, and don't get me wrong, I have a diagnosis of depression and anxiety, which started back in my late teens and early 20s, but I'm mid 40s now, and I live with that. But I no longer feel I haven't felt constrained by it pretty much forever, really, because the approach that I took is, this is nothing to be ashamed of. This is a health condition, and actually I need to embrace it, understand it, learn how to adapt my life in order to accommodate it, and how do I heal some of the traumas that I have experienced in order to get to a place of good health most of the time. And I guess I took that approach because my health visitor was so fantastic, because she gave me a different perspective. But when I go back and sort of think about the family perspective, my family were really worried about what was happening, and I completely get that, because there was very little knowledge around, well, actually I could get medical help, I could get talking therapy help.
I think we might have lost you a second there, Puppy. Sorry.
Right,
you were saying, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just start that again. So my family were really worried at the time, but the education within the Bengali community was very limited at the time. So there was very little understanding that you can get medical support for mental health struggles, for depression, anxiety. In fact, the word depression wasn't even socialized within our community. There was at the time. And so I think the fear of, well, what's going to happen to our daughter now that she's got a mental health difficulty? Is she actually going to be one of those people that we see in the media, or we see, who can't have a family, who can't have relationships? All of those things are legitimate fears because of the lack of understanding. And that was 20 something years ago. So I guess the stigma comes from shame, and that is also to do with your positioning in the community and how will other people react to it. But from a parent's perspective, it was fear around, here's a child that you've got that you love dearly, and they're now really struggling, and will they ever recover and go on to have a normal life? And actually, most of those fears can be alleviated through education and through a deeper understanding. But I think we as a community don't engage with the conversation enough. And I think we're quite um, uh, very judgmental about the way that we use mental health language. So if I tell people in my community, or I work in the mental health world, I mean, it's changed a bit in the last 5 or 6 years, but mostly people are like, oh right, yeah, she works with all the mad people. And then I have to have a really compassionate dialogue where I don't shut that down and actually explore with people what that means. And that
Absolutely.
takes emotional labor.
Mm-hmm.
Emotional labor, because each time, and you will get this, Atiyah, as a community development worker,
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
constantly trying
I can relate to that. Yeah.
yeah, you never stop working, do you? Whether it's at a family wedding or whether you're
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
you're doing your job, because it's a constant job to reset and ensure that we don't reset inequalities and we don't reset stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is important. I think when you're talking there about the educating communities and this sense of fear and anxiety, you could label it as, in terms of what family members assume this would mean.
Mm.
Um, and I think it is important to try and address that legitimate fear, as you put it. Did you find that the local community were able to help, or was there? Yeah.
I think at the time, the last people I wanted to go to was the local community,
Mm,
in terms of the local Bangladeshi community. Like, that wasn't a place of solace or comfort for me, because what you have to remember is one of the causations of my mental health struggles was this marriage that I was in. So here I am, all that 20-25 years ago, trying to come out of a marriage, which again, divorce was a hugely stigmatizing thing for Asian women. It always the blame always lands at our feet. We're always seen as the women are we I felt as a woman I was going to be the one that was outcast and judged in the
mm-hmm.
community, rather than my then husband. So my Bengali community wasn't the place that I was going to go for comfort, because people didn't want to hear the fact that I was struggling in this marriage. The narrative, you need to get on with it. He's not beating you up, he's not gambling, he's not an alcoholic. What's the problem? So I think that meant that my areas of support actually came outside of my community. So where did I go to? I confided in my health visitor as much as I could. I had a therapist the first therapist just did not get me, because she was quite young and I think inexperienced in her understanding of multicultural families and ethnically diverse communities, that I ended up spending quite a lot of time educating her. So I
Right.
stopped that therapy, but I didn't give up on therapy because I could
Mm-hmm.
see that it was going to help me. And then I think the other place, like I said, was my job, because what I was finding was my community, it was hard to be Bengali and it was hard to be British, and neither place was giving me the support that I needed. And actually my identity was getting lost in this mental health stigma, mostly by myself. And I thought, actually what I need is to get a job. So finding a job
Yeah.
and going to a role every day and having purpose and routine and structure, and using my mind to focus on jobs and tasks, those were the things that really helped me gain control of my life and recover.
Yeah. And Poppy, that is so important in terms of the current climate and people losing their income,
Yeah.
due to this COVID-19, or how businesses have been affected. I think you raised a few important points there in terms of finding solace and comfort within the community. And again, that comes back to education, and encouraging our communities to be more aware of the illness, the mental health illness that a person can have, and perceive it and view it, and accept it as an illness as they would physical health. So lots of work to be done, and it sounds like you're already doing a lot of work at the moment. With regards to the financial aspect and working as a community development worker there with the Citizens Advice Bureau, did you find that there was a lot of mental health impact there for people within the community with regards to finance?
Do you know, at the time, I didn't tell anybody. It was only in 2016 that I actually came out with my mental health struggles publicly. And again, Atiyah, that goes to show the stigma of mental health. Bearing in mind, I've been working, by this time I was leading Mental Health First Aid England, a social enterprise. I still hadn't told the world openly that I had struggled with mental illness. My team knew, my executive, I've been very open within my teams, etc., because I use it as a power, as my fuel, but externally I hadn't talked about it. And I think I wanted to create an identity for myself that didn't involve talking about my mental health. So those early jobs never included my struggles outside of my immediate circles, because of the stigma that you point out and still exists and we need to deal with.
Yeah. Did you experience that people who access the services there at the CAB, the Citizen Advisory Bureau, were perhaps presenting with similar issues which were in relation to mental health difficulties?
Yeah, one of the things I started in that job was a domestic violence helpline for minority ethnically diverse women, actually. And I was completely inexperienced. I was so young and I didn't know what I was doing. But one of the reasons I did that was when I started working there, my job was to engage minority ethnic communities in Portsmouth to use the Citizens Advice Bureau. And as I went out to do community development outreach work, I came across many women who were experiencing violence and harassment in their homes, and they needed a space to talk. So that was one of the things that I set up. And yes, completely, there was always mental health difficulties. But again, this was a long time ago, and I don't think we had the kind of knowledge that we have now to be able to have given people that support. But I hope I made a little bit of difference in specifically for women back then. I did then go on to work in a women's refuge after this role, because of my allegiances with women experiencing extreme complicated struggles. But also, I guess it was a way of being able to use my language skills, my community development approach, and my ability to just ask for help, to get
absolutely
other women support that they need.
And again, sorry, we're losing you again a little bit there, but we're just coming towards the break. We will pick up on this on the other side of the break. Thank you, Poppy. Welcome back. You're listening to Atiyah on Ramadan Radio Walls in conversation with our inspiring guest, Poppy Jaman. Before the break, we were discussing how Poppy entered into mental health and how her experiences and early work encouraged her to focus on contributing to society at large. I hope I've got that right, Poppy.
Yeah, you have absolutely got that right. Thanks, Atiyah.
Okay, so I know that you've been involved in a number of projects, and due to time, we won't have be able to cover most of them. But I'd like to firstly talk about the mental health first aid. Could you tell us how that came about and your contribution to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I then one of my bosses at in Portsmouth where I was working. So I moved on from the Citizens Advisory. I worked for a women's refuge. Then I got a job with the council developing a community development project where we supported people from minority ethnic communities coming out of long-term hospital care, mental health, mental illness, mental ill health, mental health trusts and mental health hospitals. And often people lost their second language for a period of time, which would have been English. So my little service, it was called Culture Works, and it had recruited bilingual people to support people that were coming out and of hospital care, and that job then won an award because it was pioneering for our region at the time. I didn't even know who entered it for award, but it did. And that led me to getting a job, and it was the first what we would call mainstream job, which is always amuses me that minority ethnic projects are often seen as not mainstream, and that is one of the issues, systemic discrimination issues that we've got within our health and social care system. But I'm not going to go down that road today. But I then got a mainstream job, which was working for the chief exec of the Mental Health Trust at the time, a lady called Sheila Clark. And she was amazing. She mentored me. She asked another colleague, I think it was the nursing director, Judy Hillier, to take me on a number of projects in Portsmouth. And these two women were absolutely fantastic in helping me build my career and giving me ambition. And they pointed me towards a job with the Department of Health, which was race equality lead for Southeast England. And I'm going into detail about that because I think women need to support women. And I think when women see talent, we need to, particularly when we're further on in our careers, how much influence we have and how much we can inspire people, but also demonstrate and hold aspiration and nudge women who are often, particularly from minority communities, who weren't raised to be CEOs. I was raised to be a mother and a wife and a daughter-in-law. That was the aspiration that my family held for me. I wasn't raised to be a CEO, and I didn't see women like me in CEO roles at the time because I didn't grow up in Bangladesh where there were loads of women that are actually in progressive roles, but I didn't grow up seeing that. So I think that's something that I say to women and men, look for the talent that are around you, and especially look in places that you don't normally look, within minority communities, and sponsor people's careers, because who knows what might happen. Anyway, so they nudged me towards this job. I laughed and went, there's no way I'll get this regional job. Look at me, I've got GCSEs and a bunch of community development roles, and this is a national program. Anyway, long story short, I got the job. And from that, one of the things that we started looking at is how do we educate the general public around mental health? And this thing called Mental Health First Aid was being rolled out in Scotland. It was an Australian program, and I was part of the Department of Health team that brought it to England. And then I was given the job to take it out of Department of Health and set it up as a social enterprise, which is what I did. And then 8 years later, I left, 13 years actually later. So I took Mental Health First Aid out of DH. We had 2 part-time people working on it, including myself. And as I left it in 2019, there's an annual report that you can read if you like, but it turned over just under 9 million. It trained almost 500,000 people in the UK. While I was there, I helped set it up a version of it in Bangladesh. I facilitated and helped set up a version of it in India. We run a program in Uganda. So I'm really proud of Mental Health First Aid. It's yes. I guess it goes back to the beginning of my story around community development. For me, the lack of education was one of the things that I found really struggled with whether it was my therapist, whether it was my GP, whether it was my mum. The fact that they didn't really know the complexities of my issues
Mm.
was a block. And I guess fast forwarding sort of a decade later, I was able to roll out of an education program, which I hope helped save lives and helped diminish some of the pain people may or may not have been experiencing.
It's fantastic, and it's some amazing work that you've mentioned there, Poppy. And I'm one of those people that you've mentioned in terms of being trained with the mental health first aid. And personally, I thought it was fantastic. But Poppy, did this contribute then to the Every Mind Matters platform?
No, so Every Mind Matters was slightly different. So
Okay.
I then got a non-executive director role at Public Health England, and I served 2 terms until sort of March last year, and that was sort of 6 years on as a an advisory board member,
Mm.
and that was where Every Mind Matters was born. So working with Public Health England, nudging and raising the question around, do we in this country need a mental, a government owned or government funded public mental health program where people can access support. So more than a campaign, where people can actually go to a platform, get their Every Mind Matters plan, and then be signposted to relevant information so that they can build their mental health. And that's really important,
Mm.
Atiyah, because we all have mental health just like we have physical health. Sometimes we get mentally unwell and
Mhm.
sometimes we get physically unwell. And when we understand that, we understand that actually, like physical health, if we eat healthy, if we exercise, if we get out in the sun, we can look after our physical health, and we can do exactly the same for our mental health by having healthy relationships, by getting good sleep, by moving, by meditation, prayer, spiritual practices, whatever that your faith might be. Like, all of those things help build our resilience, and that's what Every Mind Matters aims to do, is get people the right information really early on when they're struggling and losing sleep, rather than when they're at a crisis point. So I helped nudge that program forward. I was very honored to present that to our then Prime Minister, and yeah, fast forward a couple of years later, and we've got Every Mind Matters. But I was just one person that helped raise it. Actually, the whole mental health charity sector community and my peers, Mind, Samaritans, Centre for Mental Health, Young Minds,
Mm.
everybody
Mm.
got behind it, and I
Okay.
helped to convene that. So love Every Mind Matters, and they've done a lot of work for our communities now as well to make sure that the information is relevant. So I just say to everybody, get involved, and if there isn't stuff on there that needs to be on there, write to Every Mind Matters. And this is a message to all community development workers.
Mm-hmm.
If there's stuff that's not on the Every Mind Matters platform, please write to them, because they will listen and they will take it on board. We need to make it relevant, and mainstream is including minority communities. It's not having a subsection of of programs and platforms. So get involved and let's make that happen.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan, Poppy. So did this work, with your work unfolding, I want to fast forward really to the mental health and race toolkit. You work as the CEO for the the City Mental Health Alliance. Is that right?
Yeah. So I left mental health first aid, and while I was there, I had already started working on an initiative called the City Mental Health Alliance, and our vision is to create mentally healthy workplaces. So the City Mental Health Alliance is a social enterprise. It's now in Hong Kong, Australia, Singapore. We've just had our first roundtable in India. We're also developing chapters in New Zealand, US, Portugal. So I'm really proud of this global organization that I've helped found and am the CEO of. And you talk about specifically about the race toolkit, and I think, Atiyah, that's how we both connected on Twitter. Is you saw the race toolkit and then you were like, this is great, can we have a chat about this? And I'm grateful that you picked it up. And I think when the murder of George Floyd happened, we all had a emotional reaction to it, but that's, and as you know, that's not an isolated incident. But I think the thing that happened is that we were in the middle of a pandemic, and actually it landed in a way that for me personally, it completely pulled me apart, actually, because what happened was all the microaggressions, all the racism, all the discrimination that I've experienced in my life came to the fore. And then, you know, my children were talking about it, and I have a blended family now. I have two stepsons who are white. My daughters obviously are mixed heritage. So we've got a blended mixed heritage family, and we were talking about it, and then at work we were talking about it. And so I thought, well, you know, the intersectionality of racism, discrimination, and ethnicity is deeply connected with mental health. And I think my story speaks to that anyway. So we went about developing this race toolkit, and it's one of many pieces of work that we've been doing in amongst big corporations to think about inclusion and mental health. Please do, you know, put the link to the toolkit with this program. Absolutely. If people want to see it, because it goes into great detail about what this specifically speaks about city businesses, but the principles are very simple. Every company, every organization every leader need to think about 4 strategic actions. One is about allocating board level responsibility. So whether you are trying to lead on mental health, or whether it's inclusion, or whether it's the intersectionality of both, unless the board understand it and have got a objective at board level and measurements at board level, it's not gonna happen. But more importantly, the resources. Often organizations recruit a diversity lead, but they give them no budget. Or there's not a strategic 3-year plan that's been signed off and monitored. It's sort of, and I would say that's tokenism. And actually that's also setting someone up to fail, and that's unfair. So, and then the second action or strategic action is challenging all forms of racism in the workplace. So what does that mean for you as a leader in practice, and also everybody in the workplace? And that means that we will have to be educated. We all have to understand and be able to spot and recognize discrimination, racism, microaggressions, and that requires education. And it's not for Black and brown people to educate white people, but also there's an assumption that, you know, white people aren't hurt by racism. You know, that's not true. When my white friends observe racism, they're hurt by it too. And so what I'm saying is, if you've got practices or a culture that accommodates discrimination and racism, everybody's mental health is hurt. And therefore it is an everybody issue. This isn't a blame game. This is a creating and fostering healthy cultures, which is a vision, I think, and I hope all leaders have. Then the third principle is about being inclusive and building an inclusive and representative workplace, and making sure that there is appropriate health and well-being systems. So, for example, many businesses and large organizations will have employee assistant programs, but often they haven't checked if those employee assistant programs or support services for staff are skilled to deal with issues such as multicultural issues, or diversity issues, or racism issues. And I think making sure that the support that you put in place for your people at work is relevant and appropriate, whatever the demographic of your of your population is really crucial, of your employee population is. And then the fourth principle is really basic, but so many people forget to do it, is collect the data and measure progress. How do you know whether you've got people at board level that get this stuff? How do you know what the representation and the utilization and the application of the training has been? How do you know, like, if you don't measure that stuff, then how do you know that you're making progress? And, you know, everybody hopefully now gets that creating an inclusive culture is about innovation and being forward thinking. You know, the future talents that we all want to recruit, the younger people are calling out for this. And if you aren't doing this stuff, you're not going to attract talent. And that it's that simple. And if you're not attracting talent, you're not going to actually be a great organization. So yeah, so that's really the four pillars of the toolkit, and I encourage everybody to look at it. But the City Mental Health Alliance vision, you know, that's just one element of the work that we do. You know, our vision, like I said, is to create mentally healthy workplaces. And I come back to work was one of the things that was great for my recovery. And I feel that if we can create workplaces that foster belonging and inclusion and get this stuff, it's going to be a place where people can flourish, where they feel like work is part of their well-being toolkit, like I did. And it will be great, you know, it will be great for the organization because there'll be loyalty, that people will be bringing as much or all of themselves to the workplace and engaging in a way like because they own it and they love it. And we spend a lot of time at work, so it's really important to be surrounded by people that you like, but also more importantly, I think, be in jobs that are both challenging and supportive.
Yeah, thank you, Poppy. And from listening to you, I'm wondering how many of our listeners will be able to take away this toolkit and share it with their employers and organisations. I'm hearing you saying that there are many benefits, not just for the employee, but for the employer, and nurturing at different levels is advantageous for all. Poppy, I wanted to touch a little bit on the leadership program with the World Health Organization that many people don't know much about in terms of your involvement. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really, as the older I'm getting, I've got a real strong pull to do more in this latter part of my career globally, and actually being pulled more and more towards, you know, Bangladesh and what can I do to help strengthen the health systems there. And, you know, there's a number of things that I'm doing. So, for example, on a personal level, my brothers and I are sponsoring a nurse scholarship with Grameen Caledonian Nursing College in Bangladesh, and we've agreed to, as you know, Allah willing, and is sponsor a nurse every year. That's the commitment that we've made to ourselves. And I led that process because when I was in Bangladesh, I noticed that there were very few people that were choosing to work in mental health, and actually we've got a massive shortage of nurses. And the pandemic and the stuff that's happening there is going to further massively amplify that. So I guess on a personal level, I'm committing my whatever I can and facilitating that. And if you look at our organizational website, rebalance.org, that's re-balance.org. And again, Atiyah, maybe put a link to it. We talk about the nursing scholarship there. And the pandemic has put a bit of a halt to it because Bangladesh hasn't been able to do its national recruitment this year in the same way as it has done in previous years. But nonetheless, that's happening. But the other piece of work that I'm involved in, I'm a member of an organization called the International Institute for Mental Health Leadership, IIMHL. And we are collaborating with WHO, World Health Organization, and they've set up a program where we're peer mentoring and coaching support with sort of people from different countries. So I've been matched with Dr. Halal Uddin, who is the director at the National Institute of Mental Health in Bangladesh. And he and I meet monthly, and we share, I bring to him new ideas and introduce to him people around the world and in this country that are doing exceptional work in terms of the mental health space. And he's introducing me to some of the work and challenges that he's got in Bangladesh. And I guess the hope is, in time, through our joint thinking, our ability to convene people, we will get to a point where we try out and test out projects in Bangladesh. So one of the things that he was saying is that the maternal health program in Bangladesh is very good, and they run that in through the school's health program. And so one of the things that Dr. Halal and I are talking about is, could that be a vehicle to creating training for lay counselors all across Bangladesh, for example? So creating a new system where people can get access to early support in the community rather than hitting a crisis point and needing hospital care. So these are all early discussions, but I'm really proud to be able to offer what skills I have and what networks I have to Dr. Halal, and learning from him to develop and strengthen my own insights and knowledge. And who knows where that will go. But that's the project that I was telling you about earlier, Atiyah.
Fantastic, Poppy, and I'm sure your contributions are very much valued in every area that you've mentioned today. We are quickly nearing the end of the show. If people want to get in touch with you, Poppy, what do they need to do?
The best way is my Twitter account. So it's just Poppy Jaman. I'm on Twitter for work. I'm on Instagram for fun. And then I've got LinkedIn profile, which I use even less so. But I would say those are my 3 social media channels. And I'm fairly active. Depends how busy work is. But yeah.
Thank you, Poppy, for joining us today. I'm truly grateful. We have reached the end of the show. It's been really insightful, inspiring, and informative. And I'm sure many people will either be getting in touch with you or accessing the toolkits and other information that you mentioned today. Thank you again, Poppy, for taking time away from your busy schedule to help us provide this much needed focus and attention to emotional well-being. As mentioned earlier on in the show, you can also catch more mental health information on my Twitter feed at Atiyah, and I'll be popping those links in that Poppy has mentioned. And you can listen back to this show and previous shows on Ramadan Radio's YouTube channel. Thank you for listening in. You will hear from me on the first Saturday of every month. And the next show will be on the 5th of June at 1 p.m, where we should be focusing on domestic violence, domestic abuse, which Poppy also touched upon with the great Rahmanara Chowdhury. Thank you again for tuning in today. Goodbye for now, and have a lovely rest of the weekend.